Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Erich Kurschat. Welcome to today's Harmony Insights lunch date. I'm the owner of Harmony Insights LLC, a company that allows me to work with organizations and consultants using the DISC personality assessment. A lot of organizations are bringing their employees together online these days for virtual professional development and completing assessments and doing workshops online. And so I'm helping companies with that, and could talk your ear off when it comes to DISC. For those of you who know me, say yes, that is entirely true. I'm also the founder of the HR Hot Seat Inclusive Mastermind community. Real HR pros solving real HR problems in mastermind style conversation. We have over 2,600 members in 10 different licensed chapters around the country. And everything we do these days is virtual and is also free. So I would encourage you to join that community at hrhotseat.com. We have a fantastic promotional video embedded there on the homepage that will give you a good sense of what we do. And if you are an HR professional or you serve HR pros in some way, I would love for you to be a part of that. And that's at hrhotseat.com. What you are here for today is something really special. In general, I started these lunch dates, as I call them, a few months ago. I think it was either March or April. I've lost track at this point. But very selfishly, for 30 minutes of my lunch hour here in the Central Time Zone, I wanted to connect with people who inspire me so that I could be set up to do my best work later in the afternoon. And I started inviting guests to join me for these conversations and inviting you to come along as well. And my guest today, Maya Bordeaux, is someone who has made that short list of people who really do inspire me. And so, Maya, I want to welcome you to today's Harmony Insights lunch date.
Thank you, Eric. So happy to be here.
Maya, people know that I choose my guests and they choose our topics. And you and I had a fantastic conversation prior to my formal invitation to join me for a lunch date. And you chose a conversation entitled Addressing the Pandemic of Racism in the Workplace. You are the former Chief HR and Communications Officer for Tribune Publishing. You're doing some other things now. Can you give people just a quick sense of who you are, what you do, but most importantly, I think, what you are bringing to this conversation today? What is it about this topic that you have a particular passion for these days?
So thank you, Eric. I am a Chicago native, born and raised on the south side of Chicago. And I have been in the practice of HR for almost 25 years. I'm a child prodigy. I started when I was 5. And I have a real passion for people and have enjoyed a diverse set of experiences across all different types of companies, both in size and in industry, but primarily transformational roles focused primarily on driving employee engagement and improving the employee experience. And so I consider myself to, be a businesswoman with an expertise in people and culture. And I am also a licensed attorney here in Illinois. And I am a certified spin instructor.
Holy cow. That's quite a bit.
Yes, I
A
am.
Renaissance woman.
Yes. So as you stated, I recently left Tribune Publishing, and I'm now doing some consulting work, primarily in the space of diversity and inclusion. And as we all know, this is a particularly important time in our lives, in our country, and for diversity and inclusion consultants, practitioners, very, very, very busy time. And we are excited and elated about how busy it is and what I have described, Eric, as a literal awakening of our country.
Yeah.
I am grateful for this experience because I never thought I would see it in this lifetime.
Yeah. Yeah. I can't wait to dig into this today. And by virtue of disclaimer, and anyone that knows me knows that I come with disclaimers, this very much takes me outside of my own comfort zone. And that's very intentional. I really wanted to have conversations with people on this topic because I don't feel that I can speak authoritatively on it myself. Forget about authoritatively, with much confidence.
Mhm,
and,
mhm.
and so
And
I'm
you're
going to be,
not long.
I'm going to be learning from you and taking notes as we go as well. And I have some questions, and I would welcome questions from our attendees as well. You and I first met through the HR Hot Seat Mastermind community, and I'm grateful for that. You've attended some of our events. Most recently, though, you landed very squarely back on my radar through a LinkedIn article that you published entitled Let's Lead with Love, which as of today has 181 reactions, 79 comments. I know it's being shared left and right. Could you just say a little bit behind what was behind your motivation for putting that out there? In particular, I would love for you to touch on the very first paragraph and talking about people first coming to you and the transition you had to make to get to a place where you felt comfortable posting that article, which is so inspiring, and I encourage people to check out.
Thank you, Eric. So I I have had the fortune of creating, I guess, a reputation in Chicago, particularly among HR practitioners, HR leaders, CEOs, that I am very passionate about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and have done some pretty extensive work in many companies over the years, as well as consulting with many companies over the years. And so basically, my colleagues have perceived me as a very credible voice in this space, and were concerned that they hadn't heard from me, that they hadn't seen me post anything, that they hadn't seen me write an article, that I wasn't reaching out to people and talking about what was going on in the country. And this was roughly 3 weeks ago. So, Ahmaud Arbery had just been murdered,
Right.
and George Floyd had been murdered, and America um, watched this in our homes, and the world watched this in a way that has not ever happened before. I want to step back and say that, like, I believe that the impact of those particular murders is so significant this time because of the pandemic. I think that we normally are so busy and running our typical rat race of a day that, these types of heinous crimes are happening all of the time, but they've been like happening in the background of people's lives. And so you hear about it on the train, or you hear about it at the water cooler, and you go on about your day. But what the pandemic did for us is it put the entire world on pause. And so we're all at home, and we're all, more in tune with what's going on in the world. We're watching TV, we're with our families. And these incidents that have happened for hundreds of years happen in front of our eyes while we're all attentive and, in a more reflective space, because we're not as busy as we normally are.
Yeah.
And so my friends, my colleagues, people who know me were stunned that I was not talking about it. But I wasn't talking about it because I was more impacted this time than I have ever been before.
Mhm.
And it's because I too live a very busy life, and have become conditioned to believing that this is normal and this is what happens, and that police can behave in this way and can kill innocent people, and it's so and the country will allow this to happen, and the police will not be held accountable. That has been my normal my entire life. And so it was amazing to me how deeply I was impacted this time, so much that I was silenced. I could not speak about it. I was so angry. And I was even more angry that it was primarily my white friends who reached out and said, Maya, would you say something? And what I said back to them, very visceral responses, why don't you say something? I need white people to say something.
Yeah.
I need white people to speak up because I have been talking about this my entire life and it doesn't change anything. It doesn't initiate any call to action. I need white people to say something.
Hmm.
And I felt bad because they were friends who were just reaching out because they don't feel comfortable talking about this and they don't view themselves as an expert, and so they were leaning in on me to be the one to speak about this, to educate about this. And it was at a time where I was so emotionally compromised that I felt it was insensitive, and I needed to coach them to understand that this can't be a black person's problem,
Hmm.
and black people can't solve this. And the burden of fixing how this happens across the country can't be on the minds and hearts and backs of black people. This has to be everybody. And in particular, it has to be people who have power and influence in this country. And the reality is that is white people.
Yeah. Yes.
Mhm.
Thank you for that explanation. I appreciate so much about it, but as I listen to you talk, I'm reminded how appreciative I am of the words that you use. I know you do a lot of writing, and well beyond certainly the post that we're talking about, but the words that you use are so powerful. There is a very good friend of mine that's on the call with us today on the topic of words, that said early on, he said, I was seeing these headlines and hearing so much about what had happened to George Floyd, and this is on the topic of how words matter so much. And he said, I was so unsettled, of course, for so many different reasons. He said, but there was one thing I couldn't put my finger on until I realized that everyone was talking about how George Floyd had died. They said he died. And he said he didn't die, he was killed, that he was murdered. And so you using that word in the way that you do, I think is so important, because that simple word really does change how we are viewing what is taking place, but then also how we are then recounting these stories in our reactions to them, probably to other folks. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm very intentional in the words that I choose.
Yeah,
So thank you for pointing that out or noticing that.
yeah,
But words absolutely set context and create and invoke different feelings. And I want people to be outraged and I want people to be uncomfortable because in order for us to get to a better place, we have to sit in a place of discomfort. We have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable.
yeah,
You have to have the confidence and the courage to say, you know what, this makes me uncomfortable, but I'm going to talk about it anyway, just like you did, Eric.
yeah.
And when we talked about us having this lunch date, which by the way, you're gonna owe me real lunch, not just virtual lunch, but um, we talked about you know this is uncomfortable for you, but you wanted to do it anyway. And so I applaud you for that. And I also want to say the discomfort that you feel, imagine imagine the discomfort that black people feel. Imagine the discomfort that people of color feel when they are the only one, when they are relied upon to be the voice for their people, when you're the only black employee at work and people want to talk about it. They get to a place where they are curious, they want to know, and so they go to the only black employee to say or ask questions, and that is incredibly burdensome for many, many people. Now I happen to be in a different place in my life and in my career where I have so much experience with this and so much work that I have done with this topic that I feel comfortable explaining it to people over and over and over again because I take every opportunity to have a teaching moment. Because if somebody wants to know I don't ever want to embarrass them or discourage that curiosity. I want to take every opportunity to shape understanding, to shift beliefs, to dismantle stereotypes, to infuse love. Because I truly, and this may sound naive, but I am a true believer in the power of love, and that love fixes everything.
I love that. If you're with us, and I have goosebumps hearing you talk, and I so appreciate how you're saying these things. If you're with us and you're following along, and you're really hearing everything that Maya is saying, type the word love in the chat box. I want to hear from you and make sure that you are still with us. And there we go. We see them coming in, Maya. So what you're saying is resonating with people, which I'd love to see. Um, I have a note here going back a little bit, and I don't want to go back entirely to this, but just how the word pandemic in a moment kind of shifted from COVID to something very different. And to your
Yes,
point, we're sitting at home in the middle of one pandemic and now beginning to witness another, or
yes,
choosing to witness, or however you want to
yes.
phrase that. And so this word pandemic has really shifted in terms of how it's being used recently. So I promise people when they come to this, we're going to touch on challenges. We're going to touch on tips and tactics that you want to share, and we will get into those. I just want to make it known, and you're all very aware of this, that 30 minutes is an insufficient amount of time for us to have this conversation. But Harmony Insights lunch dates, by their very nature, are meant to give you just a sort of a bite-sized conversation to inspire you and to inspire action. And so I will be following up with everybody via email with additional resources that Maya is going to share for further learning and education, so that this conversation can continue well beyond the 30 minutes we have. But if I have any regret when it comes to conversations like this, it's that we don't have an entire day, if not longer, for you and I to sit here.
Yeah.
But then I'd be depriving other organizations of your expertise. So I would love to speak to, there are individuals who are wanting to take part in this conversation. There are individuals with us today who are shepherding others, as I've been saying, kind of through this conversation, HR professionals among other leaders who are charged within their organizations with inviting people into this discussion, a meaningful discussion. I would like to, if we could really quickly, I've put together a quick poll, and I used this for a recent conversation. I wanted to use it again, and it asks 3 questions. Number 1, has your company released an internal or external statement related to its diversity, equity, and inclusion commitments in recent weeks? So that's question number 1. Question 2, has your company demonstrated its commitment to DEI beyond a released statement in recent weeks? And then question 3, how confident or comfortable are you personally when it comes to fostering productive dialogue around DEI in your workplace? As people are responding to that, Maya, I would like to take the conversation in that direction. First of all, because words are so important, I asked this of a guest the other day. I've heard diversity and inclusion. I've heard inclusion and diversity. I've heard diversity, equity, and inclusion. And my favorite probably among all of them is this term belonging. When it comes to the work that we're doing and the conversation we're fostering in the workplace, what version of these terms resonates most with you, and why?
Um, Diversity, equity, and inclusion all together, and using the acronym DEI. And this is a great question because I actually had a discussion with someone recently in helping them understand the difference between these 3 topics, how they work together, and the way I would describe it is, diversity is about the people and the dimensions of the many dimensions that make up people. And so, primary dimensions of diversity are race and gender and age and sexual orientation.
Mhm.
But then there are secondary dimensions of diversity that are either less visible or that you can't guess. Um, and those are just as important as to, the makeup of who we are, and that is education, socioeconomic status, marital status, national origin. And so when you talk about diversity, it is very, very difficult to specifically define diversity because there are so many dimensions of what makes up people. And then inclusion is more about the environment. So when you think diversity, think people. When you think inclusion, you think about environment. And an environment of inclusion is an environment where every person feels valued, respected, and that they belong.
Mhm. So
And so,
belonging is incorporated into that word for you, the
yes,
equity piece.
yes.
Okay.
So
Or
belonging
inclusion, sorry,
is a
inclusion.
part of how I would define inclusion, and that is the environment that every person, no matter what they look like, no matter their gender, no matter their sexual orientation, no matter their national origin, they feel respected, valued, and that they belong. And then equity, which is that has been, I would say, in the last 7 to 10 years, that has been added to the practice of D&I because there is a clear need to ensure that all people have access and opportunity, and what they need is going to vary based on who that population is. And so that's why you have to distinguish equity from equality, because people talk a lot about equality,
Mhm.
and equality is far more about sameness.
Mhm.
Equality is about, you want to treat everybody the same. And that's great, but equity takes it a step further. You can't treat everybody the same when you have marginalized groups who don't have the same opportunity and the same access. And so those marginalized groups will need more than a group that has the resources and access and opportunity that they need. So that's why equity is far more important in the workplace than equality. And when you think about diversity and the diversity of everybody's experiences and needs and resources and access, you can't approach the workplace in the spirit of sameness. There has to be some individual assessment of what everybody needs, and that's how you bring about equity.
That's so helpful, your perspective on those definitions. I tend to memes on social media, I tend to just kind of breeze over. They come and go, maybe they make me smile and then I let them go. The memes that I have seen around equity, I think, have caused me to pause in a way that others don't. Different ways of visualizing and illustrating what equity means, I think, has been really helpful. And your definitions, your perspective on that was fantastic too. I really appreciate you sharing that. I'd also like to share the results of the poll. Some very interesting things here. When it comes to, has your company released an official statement? 53% say yes, 40% say no, and 7% say they're not sure or it doesn't apply. Maybe they're in job transition. Number two, has your company demonstrated its commitment to DEI beyond the statement? 47% say yes, 40% say no, and 13% say it doesn't apply or they're not sure. That's a concerning 40%. And maybe we can come back to that in just a moment. And then finally, how confident or comfortable are you personally? This is a very vulnerable question to answer, and all the results were anonymous. 33% say very comfortable, 47% say somewhat comfortable, and then 20% say I could really use some guidance. And ultimately, I think we could all use some guidance, right? Regardless of our comfort level.
Yeah.
We have people right now that say, I know we're kind of pressed for time with just a few minutes left, but Maya, I'm following everything that you're saying. I fall into that category of people who are uncomfortable for any reason, or maybe very comfortable, but I understand that not much is going to happen unless I take action myself or I help others take action. What are 2 tips off the top of your head that you think you can share with people to help them, following this conversation, return to society, return to the workplace, and begin to make a meaningful contribution to this conversation?
Okay, thank you for that question. So first, I would say self-education is really key. And what I have come to learn about diversity, equity, and inclusion is that this is a lifelong lesson of learning. That even though I consider myself to be an expert,
Mhm.
um, I learn something new every day. And so I will be providing you a list of resources that I encourage the participants to dive into. They are books, they are videos, there are um, movies, there are articles, and I think, encouraging people to read this with an open mind and an open heart, and truly understand and appreciate the complexities of people and culture, and that we all have to learn more about each other, and in order to be able to have a genuine respect and appreciation for other people's lives, other people's experiences, and other people's truth. So self-education would be first. Second, with regards to companies, I think all of these statements, the 53% of the participants here today whose companies issued statements, I think that's fantastic. And so I am not one who is saying, "Oh my gosh, this is all talk. I can't believe that they're sending out all these statements," because there's plenty of that.
Right,
But
right.
and of course, there is a part of me that feels like, "Oh my God, like why now? All of a sudden, does everybody care? And like why now are all of these CEOs and these companies saying Black Lives Matter?"
Of
And
course.
so we talked a little bit about that earlier, about, by this moment in time being so unique for all of us in our lifetime, and we had already begun to cultivate a spirit of unification, and we're all in this together with regards to COVID, that I think that spirit of togetherness, that spirit of we're all in this together, is what prompted or birthed this awakening of Black Lives Matter. But what is so important is that these communications, these statements have to be followed up with action.
Yeah.
And so, what does action look like? Well, one, actually beginning to have discussions internally in the workplace with your employees about this topic, about the current events, about what the experience is like for, Black, Indigenous people of color in the workplace. Um, but also a focus on your talent acquisition process. Where are you recruiting from? How are you reaching a more diverse pool of candidates? Looking at your promotion and advancement tracks, and who are you promoting? Who are you advancing, and why? Why is it that across the entire United States there is so few people of color in the higher ranks within companies? Walmart just issued a statement, and Bloomberg did an article just today about the decline of Black executives at Walmart over the last 5 years, and them now taking a serious look at what happened. Why was this the case? That there was a decline rather than an increase. And that has so much to do with environment and what we talked about earlier around inclusion, and why you can't just go out and recruit people of color and bring them into an
Mm.
environment that is not inclusive, because then
Right.
they don't stay. Um, boardrooms, when you look at boards across the United States, most boards of absolutely of the Fortune 500 is completely white male dominated, men over 50. And so when you think about like how do we address racism in the workplace, it is so multifaceted, but it starts with your processes, your policies, and your culture,
Yeah.
and creating an environment where people feel respected, where people feel they belong and that they want to be there, and that you are supporting people of color as they advance through the company.
Excellent. Thank you. I really appreciate that response. I knew that that would be your response. As I was looking at the clock, I'm thinking, you know what, this deserves the time. So I know we're beyond our 12:30 promised stopping point, but I want to wrap this up and invite those who want to stick around. I have a question for you to tee it off, and Denise, if Denise is able to stick around, we have a great question from Denise that I would love to pose to you as well. In the meantime, people are going to want to follow up with you, learn more about what you do, how you do it. Um, where can people find you online? What is the easiest way for people to get to you?
So you can find me on LinkedIn, or you can email me directly. My email is my last name dot first name, so bordeaux.maya@gmail.com. And then
Wonderful.
I'm on LinkedIn, and I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. And I see Denise just put my page up, so thank you, Denise.
Yes. And Greg shared a direct link to your article that we referenced earlier too, which
Oh, okay,
I
great.
hope
Thank
people
you.
will check
Thank
out.
you,
So
Greg.
thanks for doing that, Greg. If you enjoyed this conversation in the same way that I did, and I'm sure you did, I would love for you to come back for a future Harmony Insights lunch date. You can go to harmonyinsights.com/lunch dates. We have some great conversations coming up next week, including one with a former colleague of mine, Camelia Major. We're going to be talking very much around this similar topic. She is the head of diversity and inclusion for GE Healthcare,
Hmm.
and so that'll be a great conversation. Later next week on Thursday, I'm going to be speaking with Jennifer McClure, who's the CEO of Disrupt HR LLC. Odds are you're familiar if you're in the HR space with Disrupt HR. Jennifer is very kind to join me for that. And then next Friday, I'm going to do the third, what I call pop-up panel, where among participants that day, I'm going to choose 3 volunteers to serve on the panel. And our topic of conversation is going to be vulnerability, one that has come up quite a bit in these lunch dates, and certainly could have been a central conversation point today if we had gone down that road. Um, so that is next Friday. All of those details are at harmonyinsights.com/lunch dates. I would love for you to register for those, but then also share that URL with others so that others can join in for those conversations. Maya, I'm going to invite people to stick around and tee up a couple of questions for you, but I just can't tell you how grateful I am that you were willing to have this conversation with us today, to share your perspective, encourage us to kind of form our own inform our own perspective. I think that's so valuable. I continue to hear that, and I appreciate you underscoring that recommendation. And just in general, I appreciate so much about you. So thank you for spending your time with us today.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.